Hamas announced that it has agreed to a limited hostage deal that was proposed by Egypt, focusing on the release of 5 Israeli hostages that will lead to a complete ceasefire. Israel in turn has given a counter-offer to the deal that will secure the release of more hostages and a more limited truce. Meanwhile, Hamas has published a new hostage video showing another Israeli hostage held in captivity. I'm Alon Burstein. Let's dive in. On Saturday, March 29th, Hamas published a new hostage video showing Elkanah Buchbut. This is the second video of Buchbut that was published in the last week. While the first one he appeared alongside another hostage, Yosef Chaim Ochana, in this video he appears by himself. Like in the previous video, Buchbut refers to himself as prisoner number 22 in this video, and states that he asked Hamas to record the video himself, and that this is not part of the quote-unquote psychological warfare, as these videos are commonly referred to in the Israeli media. He says that the only psychological warfare that is going on is the one that's going on in his own head, as he is in captivity held away from his wife and son, and he appeals to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, who I will say is also shown in the video on TV, on a TV set that was positioned behind Buchbut, screaming that he wants to go home. Buchbut also makes specific appeal to the General Federation of Workers in Israel, that is an all-encompassing labor union in Israel, screaming that they know how to protect their workers and begging that they take action for him as well. In a moment of analysis, I'm going to say that the General Federation of Workers in the last several days threatened to call a general strike in Israel in response to a collision between the Israeli government and the Supreme Court. This may be the reason that Buchbut is specifically indicating that he is calling upon the General Federation of Workers. This both shows that this video was published very, very recently. Also, it shows that he and his captors, presumably, are very connected to the Israeli media and can see that the General Federation of Workers may be getting more involved in calling a general strike with regards to political issues. He is saying call a general strike with regards to the hostages. Buchbut goes on to state that deals were made to release female IDF soldiers, elderly hostages, and young people, repeatedly states that he is begging to come home and that there are other hostages that are also begging to come home. He concludes by saying that the hostages are under bombardment from the IDF 24 hours a day ever since the fighting resumed in the Gaza Strip, and that their fear is that the IDF will try to rescue them by force in a move that will lead to their ultimate death. The video ends like all of the previous Hamas hostage videos, with a fade out across the screen stating that the hostages will only be returned home in the framework of a deal, and then an hourglass showing that time is running out. As a reminder, right now there are 59 hostages that still remain in the Gaza Strip. Of them, IDF estimates are that 35 are dead and 24 of them are still alive. With regards to where things are in the hostage negotiations, there have been a lot of reports about possible advances that were made in the last several days, so I'm going to use this video in order to try to make some order. First, as a reminder of where things stand, the original deal between Israel and Hamas that began in January stated that at the end of Phase 1, which was at the end of February, the truce between the sides would be automatically extended as long as negotiations on Phase 2 would continue. Phase 2 involves a declaration of the end of the war, the complete IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and the release of all remaining hostages in exchange for an undetermined amount of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. In practice, Israel never sent a negotiating team to negotiate Phase 2 until the very end of Phase 1, and by then the sides were at a complete stalemate. The truce was then extended without negotiations on Phase 2 for over 2 weeks, until it broke down and the IDF resumed its fighting in the Gaza Strip in the last several weeks. With regards to the current negotiations, on Thursday, March 27th, several days ago, different Middle East news sites reported advances in the negotiations. By Saturday, this was confirmed by Hamas as well. Khalil al-Haya, who is a member of Hamas' leadership council, confirmed that the group has accepted a new Egyptian proposal. This proposal, according to the different leaks, has been no official document released. This is all according to leaks in different media news outlets throughout the Middle East. Says that the proposal focuses on the release of 5 hostages that are held in the Gaza Strip in exchange for a 50-day truce, restoring the humanitarian aid coming into Gaza, this was frozen since March 2nd, and the release of Palestinian prisoners, as well as the immediate engagement in negotiations on Phase 2. A different news outlet then also reported that Hamas may demand international guarantees for the implementation of Phase 2, that Hamas is not just going to demand a return to negotiations, but actually a guarantee on its implementation. And again, another news outlet said that Hamas may even demand a specific date for when Phase 2 will begin to be implemented, i.e., when are the sides going to declare a complete end to the war. In Israel, on Saturday, March 30th, 2 days after that, the government confirmed that it also received the new Egyptian proposal. However, it stated that this proposal does not meet the minimum demands of the country, and that Israel in turn has responded to the negotiating countries with its own counteroffer. According to leaks, again, this is not an official document, this is according to different leaks that were published, Israel is demanding an increase in the amount of hostages that will be released, specifically adhering to the framework of the deal that was proposed by the U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff several weeks ago, which focused on the release of between 10 and 11 live hostages, as well as half of the bodies that are held in captivity. In addition, again according to the leaks, Israel has demanded that the truce will be limited to 40 days rather than to 50 days, that a mechanism be established to ensure that the humanitarian aid that enters into the Gaza Strip will reach the civilian population in Gaza, and that the negotiating countries will ensure that the hostages are treated better, i.e. that means that including specifically an increase in the food that reaches them as more humanitarian aid comes into the Gaza Strip. Israeli news sites then quoted other sources within Israel's Prime Minister's office as stating that Israel will not engage in Phase 2 negotiations so long as Hamas still has governing capabilities in the Gaza Strip, adding that alongside the release of hostages, one of Israel's stated war aims is removing Hamas's military and governing capabilities in the Gaza Strip. Relating to the possible disarming of Hamas, I'm going to add another facet from the last several days. Over the last days, there have been reports that the negotiating countries recently proposed to Hamas a deal that would include the exile of the Al-Qassam leadership from the Gaza Strip in exchange for amnesty and substantial economic benefits. Some reports suggested that up to $2 billion were promised to Hamas that would be distributed among the Al-Qassam leadership that would agree to go into exile. On Saturday, however, Hamas publicly rejected these rumored proposals and again stated that the group is willing to discuss not taking part in a future political leadership of the Gaza Strip. However, the group refuses any notion that it will disarm and give up its weapons. According to the group, and I quote, "As long as the Israeli occupation exists, Hamas will hold on to its arms." So where do things stand at the moment in the negotiations? While these reports from the last several days suggest that the complete stalemate between the sides is possibly gradually cracking, there are still some intractable differences in the red lines that each side has drawn when it comes to the negotiations. First, there's the question of Phase 2 and the complete end to the war. For Hamas, the quote-unquote biggest fear is going to another limited deal that will lead the group to release hostages, but then have Israel return to fighting. Again, Hamas right now holds 24 live Israeli hostages. However, Hamas has also seen that the fighting can go on forever, and thus it is saying that it is only going to secure the release of those hostages if it will have a complete guarantee of the end of the war. That is the reason that the group is conditioning any deal on international guarantees and progress towards Phase 2. The group has also proposed in previous negotiations to forego the phased release of hostages and release all hostages in one event if this happens in parallel to an IDF withdrawal and declaration of an end of the war. In turn, Israel's stated quote-unquote biggest fear is a complete ceasefire and end to the war, with Hamas still maintaining its governing capabilities in the Gaza Strip, allowing it to rebuild its militant capabilities over time and essentially return us to where we were on the eve of October 7th. As I stated above, Hamas has agreed to not take an active role in a future government in Gaza. However, it has refused to disarm. And more broadly, Israel has refused to allow the Palestinian Authority, which is the competing Palestinian government, to establish its own government in the Gaza Strip. It has also not established direct IDF military governance in the Gaza Strip. Thus, right now, the only governing body in the Gaza Strip still remains Hamas. Thus, ultimately, Israel has been advocating for more limited deals in order to secure hostage release while not agreeing to talk about the active implementation of Phase 2. Israel said it is going to destroy Hamas militarily before progressing towards Phase 2 and an end to the war. In addition to that, however, another point that I'm going to highlight as one of the intractable red lines that many people are possibly overlooking is the question of how many Palestinian prisoners are going to be released in exchange for the remaining Israeli hostages. Currently, there are between 7,000 and 9,500 Palestinian prisoners who are held in Israeli jails. I'll say that the large disparity between those numbers, 7,000 and 9,500, relates to how we exactly define Palestinian prisoners, but primarily relates to if we include within the framework of Palestinian prisoners Palestinians from East Jerusalem or not. There's a dispute between Israel and Hamas and other Palestinian organizations about what is included in the definition. Either way, none of the negotiations until now have actually focused on the exact number of prisoners who will be released in exchange for each Israeli hostage, and instead each proposal leaves this to be negotiated if the larger framework is accepted and the sides agree to move forward. What that means is that even if the sides agree on a deal framework, whether it is the larger deal for all hostages or a more limited deal, the sides will only then begin negotiating the formula for how many prisoners are going to be released in exchange for each hostage. In this regard, it's important to note that all of the hostages that remain in captivity are male hostages, which makes a difference as far as how many prisoners Hamas will demand in exchange for them. Hamas demands more prisoners in exchange for the release of male captives as opposed to female captives. And while only some of the hostages were kidnapped as IDF soldiers in active duty, Hamas considers all of them to be IDF soldiers, since technically they are all at the age where the IDF could call them up for reserve duty, which again, quote-unquote, raises the price. As far as the Hamas formulas are concerned, for IDF soldiers, they demand the release of more Palestinian prisoners compared to civilians who were held hostage. In past deals back in 2011, Israel has released over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for one IDF male soldier who was held in captivity. Hamas has made statements that it plans on achieving the release of all Palestinian prisoners in exchange for all the remaining hostages, i.e. Hamas is going to try to somehow recreate that formula. Even if they demanded less, 500 Palestinian prisoners for each hostage, they could come close to depleting Israeli jails of Palestinian prisoners. Israel, in turn, is very unlikely to agree to such a demand. Israel has said that it is not going to agree to any formula that is even close to that, and is not going to agree to the release of quote-unquote heavy Palestinian prisoners, those prisoners are sentenced to life in Israeli jails. Either way, this is going to be its own complication. Even if the sides agree to a broader framework, this will also have to be worked out as the sides continue possibly towards a future deal. That is my brief highlight on the hostage situation and the ongoing negotiations right now. If you find these highlights informative, please do remember to send them on to anyone you think might be interested. Hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications if you want to know when reports come out. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.